Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Wait till the mic comes on. Got it, there we go. Good afternoon, I'll try that again. On behalf of Churches Uniting in Christ, otherwise known as CUIC, I would like to welcome you to today's panel discussion. CUIC is a coalition of 11 Protestant denominations in the United States, including the United Church of Christ, the AME Church, the AME Zion Church, the Disciples of Christ, the Christian Methodist Episcopal Church, the International Council of Community Churches, the Episcopal Church, the Moravian Church, the Presbyterian Church USA, the United Methodist Church, and the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, who are united under one common mission: the elimination of racism as a barrier to unity, both among our communions and the world writ large. I currently serve as on the coordinating council of this group as the UCC representative and chair the Young Adult Task Force, which is co-sponsoring this event today. Over the last 5 weeks, the Young Adult Task Force held 3 panel discussions similar to this one in our webinar series that explores issues of racism and racial justice. Racism and racial justice at the intersection of mental health. Our first panel during the first week of October considered the importance of mental health and attending to one's self-care in the midst of doing racial justice advocacy and activism. We were joined by our current president, Bishop Teresa Norton, and Dr. Emmanuel Larty at Candler School of Theology at Emory University. The following week's conversation considered the topic of domestic violence at the intersection of racial justice and mental health, with Dr. Stephanie Crumpton from McCormick Theological Seminary and Reverend Wesley Watties from Beneath God's Wings in Indianapolis as our featured panelists. In the third week in October, we explored the issue of substance abuse and mental health. Dr. Trina Armstrong from Garland Evangelical Seminary and Dr. Christoph Ringer of Chicago Theological Seminary, and a graduate of the Divinity School here in the Graduate Department of Religion, led that conversation. Today we are exploring the issue of faith at the intersection of the school-to-prison pipeline and its mental health effects on youth of color. For this conversation, the Young Adult Task Force teamed up with the Public Theology and Racial Justice Collaborative at Vanderbilt Divinity School. I am extremely grateful for the leadership of the Reverend Dr. Teresa Smallwood, who serves as the Associate Director of the Collaborative, and whom I first met when we were both students at the Howard University School of Divinity. Her support has been invaluable in this effort. I am also grateful for the leadership of Dean Emily Towns, the director of the Collaborative, whose support for Vanderbilt and her students is a true gift. She will come to bring you greetings in just a moment. But I want to conclude my remarks with my words of welcome with a really big thank you. Anyone who has ever served in a leadership capacity of any kind, knows about the level of hard work and dedication that goes into making an event like this a success. This would not have been possible without the hard work and dedication of members of the Young Adult Task Force. I am just about convinced that the ability to delegate is a spiritual gift. And I'm eternally grateful to the members of the Young Adult Task Force who took on assignments with thoughtfulness, excitement, and dedication. These individuals made my life relatively stress-free during the planning process, which enabled me to press on in the work of my dissertation. And for that, my advisor thanks you. So, to the people I eventually called the Justice League, also known as the A-Team, also known as the We Get It Done Squad, to Brandon Smith, Christian Troy, Felicia Commodore, Antonio Red, Luna McIntyre, Karen Lee, who's here today, Megan Dean, and Keisha Womack, who is also here, thank you for everything. Y'all continue to be thebomb.com. It is really hot up here. Finally, to our panelists, Garland, Burton, Roosevelt, Ira Helbingen, and Philis Sheppard, and today's facilitator, my dear friend, Jim Bailey. Thank you for your participation. Every one of these individuals was extremely easy to work with. We met once to discuss the vision and objectives of the panel discussion, and they ran with the vision. Moreover, they were responsive to emails in a timely manner.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
That makes a world of difference in the planning and implementation of this kind of event. So, for those who are not able to be with us today, we are broadcasting this on our Zoom platform, and you can actually visit our website, Churches United in Christ, or to watch it afterwards. And with that said, please join me in welcoming the Dean of the Divinity School so I can get off this hot platform because I feel like I've been on a trip.
So on behalf of the Divinity School, I do want to welcome you all here today. And a special moment, the collaborative has fellowships proposed. And we have our first recipient with us today. Sarah Eccleston. Her has been awarded a fellowship for her project, Interrogating Race, Racism, and the Power in Christian Community Development. We thought that it would be good to do our first presentation in a public forum, so Sarah, could you come up? And this is a $1,000 scholarship. Those of you who are Vanderbilt students, step up. You too. Congratulations. When we talk about mending ourselves and mending our children, and trying to understand the power and the obscenity of the faith from the school to prison pipeline, I think it's important to think through who benefits. Who benefits from that kind of obscenity in our midst? Who suffers? I mean, genuinely suffers from that kind of obscenity in our midst. So it is with great pride that I'm glad that we were able to work with Michael and his Dabam team to bring this to the Divinity School as a way of supporting the work of CUIC. And also, I am grateful for your interest in being here. So as we get this show on the road, I wish it were a show, but it is going to be something that we all can take and use and hopefully change what's going on. With those brief remarks, let me invite to the podium the Reverend Jennifer Bailey of Faith Matters Network, someone who is on the regular, changing the world for the better.
Thank you, Dean Helms, and thank you to my dear friend Michael, who's been with me in the struggle. I'm a student here at Vanderbilt Divinity School. So thank you so much. I'm so happy to be with you all today, in part because this is an issue that is personal for me. This issue of the school to prison pipeline. And I think for some of us in the room, it's personal for our families. About a month ago, my cousin Tasha came home after spending almost a decade in prison in Mississippi because of unjust drug laws that locked him up at the age of 17. what you wouldn't know about Tisha's story, and hearing that statistic, right, that we anticipate now that 1 in every 3 Black babies, Black male babies that are born in the United States will at some point in their life be in prison. 1 in 6 Latinx babies will end up in prison. They're estimating it and building prisons based on that. Is that he is part of an ongoing narrative that says that young Black boys and brown boys don't deserve the same futures as other boys. And young Black girls and young brown girls who are also disproportionately imprisoned and incarcerated don't deserve the same futures as others. And so today I stand humbly as your moderator. I'm going to get out of the way so the real experts can dive us into conversation with this task. As you think about your presence here today, don't just let this be another lecture that you go to. This ought to be a call to action for you. Because the work of scholarship, the work of activism means nothing if it doesn't matter for the Tishas. So with that, let me just describe how the flow of this afternoon, evening's conversation is going to go. If you haven't gotten some food, go ahead and grab some, get cozy, about to dive in. We will hear remarks from our distinguished panel first. Each will reflect for about 10 minutes, 7 to 10 minutes, on specific topics that they've selected. We'll then engage in a conversation across panelists, and then we're going to turn the floor over to you so that we can have some engaged dialogue about what this has meant in your own life, or what brings you to this room and to this particular space. And so with that, it is my distinct honor to introduce our first panelist for this evening, Garland Burton. Let me tell you a little bit about Garland. Garland Burton is the director of the National Freedom School Partnership, a program of the Children's Defense Fund that offers free literacy and enrichment programs for at-risk children of color, grades K through 8. A United Methodist deaconess. Garland is also a retired CEO for women's advocacy for the worldwide United Methodist Church. I've had an opportunity to get to know Garland on the front lines of social justice struggles, so she's not just talking about it, she's doing the work. And so with that, Garland, I'll turn it over to you.
Should I come up for Michael? Come up. Hello. Hello. It's good to be here with you. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the work that I do and why I do it. I'm going to start with something that you might know. In 2019, Yale University did a study. And they did a study with preschool teachers who teach preschool around the country. And what they did was ask these teachers to watch video clips of preschool children. And they asked for the teachers to look for signs of challenging behavior. How many of you know this study? They look at these children and look for signs of challenging behavior. And what they did was follow the teacher's eye movements and the teacher's reactions. And this was a mixed group of children. The children in the videos were actually not real school children. They were child actors of a preschool age. And they really didn't show any challenging behavior. The children were asked just to talk and sort of be themselves. But what the study found was that when the teachers were looking for signs of behavior, that they stayed more steadily gazed on Black boys specifically and Black children. And that is a sign that the Yale University study said this is a sign, this is one sign that they were looking at of implicit bias. Not only did the teachers look at the children as behavior problems, they identified that those children were behavior problems. Then they did a blind study where they talked about specific children. And we're told that, they didn't show the children, but they talked about a scenario and they named children. And so when the researchers told the teachers that the child's name was Deshaun or Latoya, and others heard that the kids' names were maybe Jake or Emily or Megan, the researchers found that the children's responses differed by race. And the teachers then talked about what possible problems they may have. I contend that this is not just a school to prison pipeline issue, that this is a cradle. I call it a cradle to grave issue. Because what this issue is, what is being taught, what is being said is that children are being written off from the time that they are born because of their race and also their social location. Children are being written off from the time that they are seen in a public school system, preschool, pre-K, to the time that they are immigrate as being problems because of their race, ethnicity, and also social location and economic situation. A majority of our teachers in the United States are middle-class women, most of whom are white, with little or no multicultural or inter-class experience. The world that we live in is a different world than when I was young, and I'm old and retired, my kids are grown. But when I was younger, there was a different world. But the world of teaching has not really changed that much. And the majority of teachers who go into public education come from a particular location where they are not required to or have no desire to or no impetus to go into different locations other than their own. They may be well-meaning and good people, but the reality is that if we are not exposed to, if we are not a part of a community that is more diverse, where we see more about different people, we come into it with our bias. And when we're dealing with a majority culture that is portrayed in media as a culture that says certain names and certain ways that people look, certain places where you live, certain kinds of cars that you have, certain family constructs are more positive and more successful than those people who don't look like that, who don't sound like that, who don't live in those places. What you have is implicit bias that begins to affect a child and a child's family from the time that they are born. The impact is felt in Nashville. In Metro Public Schools, Black and Latino children account for about 20 to 25% of our student body. But when it comes to those who are suspended or in-school suspension or expelled, more than 50% of our expulsions and suspensions are Black and Latino children. Most of them are males. So that tells you that there's a disproportionate number of children of color who are being railroaded, I think. They're being railroaded into a system when you have a choice of whether to talk to a person or send them into suspension. The choice is being made to put them into suspension. The children are also in schools and in communities that are financially underserved. I try not to use the word underprivileged, although underprivileged is a word, but I think we have to take responsibility as a society that we have people who are underserved by the things that we pay taxes for. We pay taxes for protection from crime. We pay taxes for public transportation. We pay taxes for schools. And many of the children who are impacted by the cradle to prison pipeline are those who live in areas where they are underserved by public services. They're also in places where parents are younger, with more lower paying jobs, with less formal education, which translates into lower paying jobs, which means they are mostly laborers who are the legs that we stand on. And when we don't pay a living wage in our communities, these families are going to be poor. So when we refuse to pay a living wage to our lowest paid person, then our families are going to be poor. And the combination of poverty and race come together to make it difficult for some children to succeed and than for others. So what Freedom School seeks to do, what we found is that because of these issues, African American and Latino children in Nashville who live in poverty are twice as likely to read below their grade level. And reading is an indicator of future success. If a child is not reading at grade level by the 3rd or 4th grade, the chances are that child will continue to underfunction in school. Less likely to graduate from high school and less likely to go to college and all the things that come with being able to go to college. And so what Freedom School seeks to do and has sought to do since 1995 is to provide a summer stopgap with regard to reading. We provide a 6-week summer literacy and enrichment program free to low-income families, particularly geared toward children of color. The program is open to all children who are struggling in some way, but the curriculum is designed to address the particular needs of children of color. The books that we read are culturally based. They are by and about people of color and people who have made a difference in the world with regard to social justice. So we last year read a book about the Freedom Riders of Nashville, about Helen Keller, about Sonia Sotomayor, Justice Sonia Sotomayor, when she was a child. So we try to have curriculum that shows kids that not only can you make a difference when you get older, but you come from greatness right now. And greatness can start right now. Sonia Sotomayor, as an aside, didn't just pop out of the box being a Chief Justice. When she was a child in the Bronx, she was the one who used to mediate the fights on the playground. So she started dealing with justice issues early. So the story is about her being, it's called A Judge Grows in the Bronx, and it's about her growing up in a low-income neighborhood, but having an early penchant for justice. Freedom School also matches the children with caring mentors who are college and graduate age students of all colors. Most of them are people of color, but it's open to all people. A hint to the Vanderbilt students, will be looking for teaching interns this summer, so hit me up if you want to teach this summer. We do have a paid internship for that. And we also bring together community groups who have an interest in working with our children to foster their greatness. And so what we are doing with Freedom School is countering the narrative that children of color who are poor cannot succeed by providing them free curriculum with meals every day and enrichment things that nurture their greatness and their goodness. We look at the culture and say the cultural expression of hip hop is a legitimate poetry and self-expression, self-expression vehicle, and we encourage the kids to write music, to do African dance, to do art, to do drama. We do field trips. We do one public demonstration per summer, where last year it was about child hunger, to get the kids involved in speaking their own truth and getting them to understand that they can be participatory citizens and that you have to be a citizen activist to make sure that social change happens. So our work in Freedom School is a direct counter to what happens when implicit and explicit bias by race, when social constructs that devalue people who do not have a lot of money, and when parents who are young and inexperienced meet up with a system that is not friendly to those things. That's what Freedom School is all about. And I would just say in closing that part of our work with the Cradle to Prison Pipeline has to be changing how public schools function and how they look. Because as long as public schools are largely led by people who don't have a clue about the children that they're serving, things are not going to change. Does this mean that people who are white and middle class can't teach school? No, it doesn't. But it means that the narrative about how people learn and what is valued valuable to learn for survival in the world needs to change. And I think that's what we're working on in Freedom School. Thank you.
Thank you, Tia. You guys hear me? All right. I'm a preacher, so I feel like sometimes these mics hold us back. So if you can hear me fine, I'm not going to use the mic. Is that all right?
I think they need it for the webinar.
Also, I'm a
They hear?
They need it for the webinar.
Okay. All right. Well, I will talk extra loud for our friends who are joining us online as well. How about that? Wow, it is now my distinct honor and privilege to introduce you all to Dr. Roosevelt Noble, who's a senior lecturer in sociology here at Vanderbilt University. His research centers this deeply prolific question: how does race affect the phases of judicial processing and internal dynamics of the inmate subculture within U.S. prisons? His book, Black Rage, examines the impact of many sociological factors, such as marginal status in education and employment, police brutality, and racial profiling on the mental state of minority inmates once they reach prison. In addition, avenues of potential bias by key players in the justice process are examined for their collective impact in deciding who goes to prison in the United States. With that, I'll welcome Dr. Okay.
Hello, I will go ahead and get started. Given that my class is normally around 2 hours and 30 minutes, 10 minutes is going to be a stretch for me. That's just trying to get us out of here before that time has come and gone. First, I do want to say thank you to Michael for inviting me to do this. I was very intrigued by it in part because my background is one in which the prisons, the school to prison pipeline has impacted me and some of my closest friends in a lot of ways that a lot of people don't know about it. Stuff where Maureen up in the back room about a presentation this past Sunday where I showed one of my popcorn football pictures from 1986. And in this popcorn picture, you see about 50 little black faces. And then on that picture, you saw also about 20 yellow X's. And I told them the 20 yellow X's represent folks that are either dead or in prison.
Wow.
And a lot of them that came to that point started when we were in school. So what I want to talk today about is mass incarceration and the school to prison pipeline. First and foremost, I always tell my class, I tell a lot of folks, in the U.S. we have a very, very serious incarceration problem. But the sad thing is, if we had a more effective and more efficient criminal justice system, we'd have an even more drastic mass incarceration problem. When you think about the fact that if we had 1,000 serious felonies that happen right now today, Caroline, how many of those folks would actually serve time in prison? We have 1,000 serious felonies happening right now today. About 26 people, statistically. So if you think about the fact that we actually had, let's say 400 of those thousands spent time in prison, what we think is a mass incarceration problem right now would be a much more drastically big epidemic. We talk about this corrections funnel. Now, when you start out with a pretty broad spectrum of folks up here at the top, by the time you make your way down to where you get to prison, all right, if you start out with 1,000, by the time we get down here to 26, that 26 was very black and brown, whereas you start out at the top with a much more diverse population of folks. So when we think about who actually goes to prison, and we talk about the issue of mass incarceration, the problem would be significantly worse. And one statistic that I also share with people to highlight this point is the fact that one of the reasons why we don't have 100% of the folks up here make it down here is that the police aren't very good at arresting and catching people. Even if you take murder, the crime that we perceive to be our most serious offense, the annual clearance rate for murder is around 69%, which means that about 31% of murders go unsolved. And that's the highest crime. Okay? To that, we transition to get you some additional information. When we look at the U.S.'s incarceration problem, this is something that goes back decades, but largely when we think about the time period in the 1980s, when the war on drugs and all that stuff launched, most of our exponential growth has been in state prisons. Okay? Federal prisons, relatively small in comparison to state prisons, still large but relatively small. When we break this group down and look at who actually goes to prison, the vast majority of our inmates on the state prison side, you can see that a large proportion of those in our state prisons are there for violent charges. When we look at our federal prison, in contrast, about 50% of the folks in our federal prison are in drug charges. Overall, when we look at jails, prisons, as well as state prisons, state jails, about 1 in 5 folks in our prison system are there on drug charges, all right? Non-violent offenses. Even more shocking when we look at our youth numbers. When you dissect that youth number, a large proportion of them are there on non-violent offenses, all right? In some cases, these are relatively trivial offenses that are only deemed criminal because of the person's status as a juvenile, okay? Moving forward, the vast majority of those that we actually have under the control of the criminal justice system, I could have put another one of my students on the spot and had them give me this one. The vast majority of folks are actually on probation. So while we may have at any given point in time about 7 million people who are under the umbrella of the criminal justice system, the vast majority of those on probation means they're out and about for walking Mondays. Okay? 4 million roughly, about 2.2 million incarcerated meaning jail as well as prison, and about another 840,000 on parole. All right, so we have a pretty, even with the filter that we had, we still have about 7.1 million folks. So again, we have a much more efficient system. This whole country would look like Huntsville, Texas. Never been Huntsville, Texas, prison in every corner of prison. All right. Moving along. So where does that put us? This is one of the categories. I like to be number one in a lot of things, but this ain't one of them. Right? When we look at how we compare to other industrialized countries in terms of proportion of our population, incarceration rate per 100,000, what number of our citizens we locked up relative to other places. We locked up an alarming rate of our citizens. It gets even more drastic when we think about racial. She referenced these numbers here. Think about black men. 1 in 3. Black women. 1 in 18. All right? Latino women and men. 1 in 6 versus 1 in 45. So our mass incarceration problem, at the same time that it's relatively large, is also relatively disproportionately impacting black and brown folks, people of color. Okay. To that point, I want to transition now. I gave you just a general overview of kind of some of the problems with regards to mass incarceration as a whole. But a smaller segment of that is largely due in part to, as it pertains to the school to prison pipeline, zero tolerance policies in school. All right. I want to transition to that particular part. When we think about zero tolerance policies, a lot of these things started popping up in the mid-1990s. A lot of school districts went to this stance of any type of deviant behavior, essentially, fell, offended, almost no questions asked, right? As early as 1996-97 school year, 79% of schools had adopted a zero tolerance policy for violence. Many of their standards went far beyond the federal statutes. Additionally, in conjunction with these policies, the states and federal governments also made funding available for police officers in the schools, for metal detectors, all these additional elements. My school was one of them. My high school, we had police officers who were on the hallways, all right? This shift in our disciplinary policies also coincided with the shift in how we treat our juvenile justice system and our juvenile detainees, in terms of we shifted that to mirror more what we did in our adult prison side. Consequently, the zero tolerance policies have resulted in disproportionate impact on students of color. On the next slide, I give you some somewhat shocking, somewhat alarming statistics, but to just highlight the ways in which Black students are at a great disproportionate advantage when it comes to these zero tolerance policies. Statistically, black students make up about 16% of the youth in our country. All right, 16%. Yet, 32% of those who receive an in-school suspension are black. 33% of the students who receive an out-of-school suspension are black. 42% of students who receive one or more out-of-school suspensions are black. 34% of students who are expelled are black. These are nationwide statistics. 27% who are referred to law enforcement. 31% of those who are subject to school-based arrest. This is the one that's really sad. Black children represent 18% of preschool enrollment, yet they represent 48% of those preschoolers out of school suspension. Preschoolers. I have a 5-year-old daughter. I wish our teacher would call me something she's suspended. But that's basically what it amounts to. You have preschoolers facing suspension. When we think about the school to prison pipeline, all right, in terms of how that we jump to that next step, students suspended are significantly much more likely to come into contact with law enforcement in the juvenile justice system. We also know that black youth are more than 5 times likely to be detained or committed compared to their white youth counterparts. Juvenile detention facilities in 2015 held 48,043 offenders, and we break these numbers down. 44% of these were black, despite representing, again, only 16% of the youth population. We look at the total number of juvenile detainees that we have in our country, 44% of them were black, and they represent only 16% of our population. We also know that nationally, the youth rate of incarceration was 152 per 100,000, that's nationally. When you break it down and look at just black, the number is 433, which means that out of every 100,000 black youth in our country, 433 are detained. In comparison, the rate for whites is 86. Okay. Overall, from 2001 to 2015, the racial disparity between black and white youth in custody increased by 22%. So when Michael asked me to come and to participate in this panel, I obviously said yes, in part largely because my story is one of, I could have easily been one of those statistics. Not a lot of people know my actual story, except for, again, Maureen, who was I had a real talk with some students on campus on Sunday night. And I came from a background where I should be one of those statistics. My mom had me when she was 16 years old. My brother's 3 years older than me. I have a sister who's a year older than me. I have another sister who's 3 years older. By the time she was 21, she had 4 kids. When I take a snapshot of how we grew up with the poverty that we grew up in, I very easily should be one of those statistics. But I wasn't. Somehow something happened in my path that broke that school to prison pipeline.
Thank you so much, Dr. Noble, for grounding it for us in some facts and figures that really uncover just how deep and widespread this problem is. So next up, I get to introduce Dr. Ira Helderman, who is a licensed professional counselor and religious studies scholar. Dr. Helderman is a published author, a teacher, who's worked for almost 17 years in Nashville in a variety of clinical settings. But his greatest honor, his greatest accomplishment is being my husband, y'all. So, Dr. Helderman, come to the podium.
She's not kidding about that. So I'm hoping to talk to you all a little bit about the way that psychotherapists approach problems that we talked about today, and we just heard a lot about. And as I was listening to Garlinda, I just thought to myself, it's really not hard work. I have a hard time thinking that it would be hard to understand that we're adults. So if you can imagine just being an adult and sitting in a room where you're constantly told over and over and over again, there's something wrong with you, there's something wrong with you, you are less than, you are less than, you are less than. And that's every day. You go to a room and that's what you're told. And that's what you can see in somebody's eyes when they're looking at you. that would have an impact on us, just as an adult. And now, and this is why I was sitting there, so hopefully it makes sense. But, and then I asked myself, like, what if it's not even clear? What if it's not direct? You are bad. You are bad. You are bad. Is that worse, or does that make it like less bad? It's more kind of that's just in the air that you're breathing. Maybe in the look in their eye, but maybe not a direct, you're bad, you're bad, you're bad. But, and then when we think about that on a cultural level, where just again, the air we breathe, how many messages are fed to the kids that we've heard about that they are less than and deserve less. And so, psychotherapists are trained to help with the depression, the anxiety that these kind of things can trigger in people. And I thought to myself, I might talk to you a bit about how, can I get that back? I actually didn't need this visual aid, but now that we have it, it'll be. So just give for 1 second, then we can get rid of the buzzing after. So I thought to myself that I might share with you a little bit about how psychotherapists are trained, and more importantly, what they're not trained to do, and to look for and to listen for when approaching these issues. And at a basic level, therapists tend to approach these sort of problems from the frame of treatment and treatment planning. And it occurred to me that a good way to get at this, to help explain what I'm talking about, to make this clear, is through a particular element that most therapists use called case studies. So case studies are just kind of narratives that psychotherapists will train with, they'll be taught. And in these narratives, they have key pieces of information that the therapist is supposed to pick out to be able to create that treatment plan. And so I thought we could all be training therapists here in the room for a moment and look at a case study. And when I had this idea, what I did was I just went to Google. I was walking with my phone. I took my phone out. I'll just Google psychotherapy case studies, and then it helpfully filled in the rest of the case studies examples. Actually, what do I do? Can you rescue me here? I don't know. I thought you were seeing what I was doing. It was cool because when I typed in. That's okay. I'll read it to you. So the first thing that comes up is if you Google psychotherapy case studies examples, is a website called SciWeb, and it gives you a few examples of case studies. And I'm just going to read to you case study number 2, because it's the shorter one. But we'll all be therapists here and try to listen, what might a therapist be looking out for, and what is not in this case study. That's really what we're trying to get at. So case study number 2, Kristen is a 38-year-old divorced mother of 2 teenagers. She has had a successful, well-paying career for the past several years, an upper-level manager. Even though she has worked for the same thriving company for over 6 years, she's found herself worrying constantly about losing her job and being unable to provide for her children. This worry has been troubling her for the past 8 months. Despite her best efforts, she hasn't been able to shake the negative thoughts. Ever since the worry started, Kristen has found herself feeling restless, tired, and tense. She often paces in her office when she's there alone. She's had several embarrassing moments in meetings where she has lost track of what she was trying to say. When she goes to bed at night, it's as if her brain won't shut off. She finds herself mentally rehearsing all the worst-case scenarios regarding losing her job, including ending up homeless. And then it says, click here for diagnosis. And when you click here for diagnosis, it says generalized anxiety disorder. And then it has a link that says return to case studies. That's it. So what the therapist is going to notice there is she's got this worry and this rumination. She has embarrassing moments where she lost track of what she was trying to say. Remember, I read that part. But that means that she has difficulty focusing and concentrating. That's going to be another diagnostic criteria they can check on the list. But what's not in this case study? I'm actually, asking you all, anyone up here. What are some glaringly obvious things that are not included in this case study?
For background?
For background, what are some specific things about her background that might be in this case study that's not needed in the case study, though, right?
Her race.
I heard her race. Her race. That would make a difference, wouldn't it? If this case study was written, if this was a Latina woman, it might make a difference in the way we would read that case study, right? If this case study was written by somebody whose parents had been homeless, it would make a difference in the way we read this case study, right? But the therapist doesn't need that. This assumes the therapist does not need that. It's not necessary to know what this person's background is, what their socioeconomic background is, what their racial identity is. All that's necessary is to know they've got worry and rumination, and they have difficulty concentrating, and that means that they have generalized anxiety disorder. And that's just at the point of diagnosis and assessment, because that point comes all the way down through treatment. Before I say more about kind of like what the implications of those things being missing from this case study, it reminded me of a different case study that we might think about, which would be a teacher. So we heard about how the implicit biases impact a teacher when they're just in a room of children that are not doing any challenging behavior. But we might imagine that we're a teacher with multiple years of experience, and we need a little vignette I wrote, working in the public school system. And it's the end of a long semester, and there's this one 10-year-old boy, Ricky, who has been difficult all semester long. Today, however, he was at his worst. He just seemed so angry all day and resistant to whatever redirection you gave him. It's the afternoon now, and so it's been hours of this, and when in the last period of the day, you tell Ricky directly that everyone needs to stay in their seats, and just a few minutes later, he looks you straight in the face and gets up, walks over and takes a classmate's pencil, looking at you the whole time, and it's every day that this kind of thing goes on. So the question is this bad behavior that is in need of discipline? So to the teacher in this situation, hopefully we can maybe kind of empathize with that teacher. They might be feeling frustrated in that situation. But again, that case study, that story, leaves out a lot of context. And the classic example that I always hear when I research this is, how would this change if we knew that Ricky hadn't eaten in over 24 hours? How would it change that teacher's perspective? And how would it change the teacher's perspective if they knew that happened on a regular basis, that Ricky doesn't eat for 24 hours plus? And what if the teacher knew that was going to be an ongoing thing? And what role is it for the teacher at that point? Like what is the teacher's job? In that situation. So in both stories, when we first look at them, they lack a lot of context that to me can make a lot of difference. For psychotherapists, the assumption is that we have these conditions, these illnesses called depression and anxiety, and they exist in us, in our body, in the individual person. And you come to them, and they have treatment modalities that are meant to try to ease these presenting symptoms. Let me try to help you to have less worry and rumination. Let me try to help you to sleep better. And traditionally, that would be what therapists would be trained with. Now, I teach over the graduate students in counseling. I adjunct over there a class or two a semester. And so one of the classes that I co-teach frequently is a counseling diverse populations course. Now, I put that in quotes, and I'm going to see more audience participation. Why would I put that in quotes, and any reactions to a counseling program that has a counseling diverse populations course?
Well, diverse by whose standard?
Exactly. Who is a counselor? Who is doing the counseling of the diverse populations that would require a counseling diverse populations course? It would be someone that looks like me, right? And so this is progress. It's positive that you have more and more training programs that are trying to take into consideration these issues of context and culture and identity. But it's still sort of overlaid upon a basic assumption that this person here has this issue and it's their issue, and we have to treat the symptoms of this issue. Now, to me, that is not nothing. So if somebody is experiencing intense depression or intense anxiety, I want to help them to ease those symptoms. But if I'm only staying at that level of symptom and I'm not seeing anything beneath that, then I really am just at a surface level. And that's kind of where I might wrap up. The other, the other thought I just had as I was sitting here. So again, hope it will come out and make some sense that I just had it sitting here. Was the course I'm teaching this semester is addictions, and it is when we talk about the way, and we've heard about the way our drug policies in this country, the role that plays in the school to prison pipeline is, really probably can't be overemphasized, can't be underemphasized. We can't say enough. When we using the same metaphor of a case study, whenever I turn on the news today and I hear someone tell a story about a person who has had repeated incidents of stealing and ends up with legal charges, but it's because they got hooked on pain medication and it's opioid, and they are probably, again, look like me, there's a totally different message, a totally different case study of story than was told during the crack epidemic in the 80s and 90s, where the people did not look like me, they were brown and black people. And as we're shifting from a model that is, as Chris Christie in the Republican debate shares about, spoke about shifting from a drug policy that approaches addiction as a legal issue to a health issue, how much that is wrapped up in that more and more, that there's more public attention to why people die of opioids is pretty striking to me. But with that, I'll shut up. Thank you so much for.
Well, last but certainly not least, it is my honor to introduce Dr. Philis Sheppard, who is Associate Professor of Religion, Psychology, and Culture at Vanderbilt Divinity School in the Graduate Department of Religion. Her research focuses on how engaging the intersection of the social and intrapsychic. In her book, Self, Culture, and Others in Womanist Practical Theology, she argued for the necessity of fostering a psychoanalytic dimension to womanist approaches to practical theology, which sounds impressive because it is impressive. So I'm going to invite Dr. Sheppard up. That's okay.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I'd like to thank the committee for inviting me. I'm gonna try to use the mic. Is it working at all? No. Okay. I'd like to start not with a case study per se, but a news story. Jane, Black transgender girl, 16, in jail.
In April 2014, a 16-year-old African-American transgender girl known as Jane Doe, alleged to be too violent by the Department of Children and Family Services, was sent to Connecticut's York Correctional Institution for Adults. She was there without a criminal charge or conviction after an altercation that allegedly injured a DCF worker. She was also held in solitary confinement for 2 weeks for up to 22 to 23 hours per day in the adult institution until the court ruled on where to place her. Because of advocacy on her behalf, the court placed her in an adult facility for women instead of a men's adult facility, which is normally what would happen. I start with her case because I think very often one of the forgotten, missed, or made invisible groups of adolescents in the criminal justice system and in society at large are those who identify as LGBTQ. Jane, at 16, is a minor. Jane had already experienced abuse and trauma, as most youth do prior to entering the DCS. So I'm asking you, what do you think the impact on Jane's sense of self might be at this point? You like your professor, I'm gonna wait till I hear answers. What do you imagine? You're Jane, you're 16, you're transgender, female, and you've just been arrested, and you're Black. Handcuffed. What was that?
I think on one hand, I'm already scared because I am African American, so I know that the odds of me being mistreated and unjustly treated are higher. But then on top of that, as a transgender female, I also have the fear of where they're going to send me. Are they going to respect my identity? Is that going to be taken into account? Being a minor, also, like, that's a whole nother level of, am I going to be sent to a prison for whatever charge that I have?
Anyone else? What would you be feeling about yourself? Yes.
Well, I was just going to say, within this entire benefit country that we live in, systems that we live in, I'm a Black transgender woman, like, and I get arrested, I would probably think I was going to die. Not just be mistreated, but like the chance of the raising that
Terror.
young trans women are.
So when you combine that with what's already happened in Jane's life, at this juncture, she's in a state of terror, a trauma state. I think one of the things I like to try to keep in mind, whether I'm doing psychotherapy, whether I'm teaching or reading the news, is that generally speaking, the Jane Does are not the only ones this is happening to. We know that from your social analysis. Let's continue. Up to 300,000 gay and transgender youth are arrested each year. More than 60% are Black and Latino. I'm going to read that again. 300,000 gay and transgender youth are arrested each year, and more than 60% are Black and Latino. How can that be? A disproportionate number of queer youth, particularly lesbians and bisexual girls, end up in jail or prison in the United States, according to a study by UCLA. Social attitudes condoning homophobia could contribute to the likelihood queer youth will be victimized in custody. We already know, if we've done any reading in this area, that the incidences of physical and sexual violation in prisons, in jails, against youth and against transgender, against LGBTQ youth in general, is extraordinarily high, with very little recourse after one has been violated.
And worse, the violations occur not just in peer interactions, but staff also violate young people. And the ways in which those kinds of violations occur are from misgendering, comments, as well as physical attacks. So someone identifies as transgender, staff person grabs them physically to say, you have breasts, you're not a man, you don't have a penis, those kind of things. And very little recourse for you. These differences may best be understood within correctional environments in which staff biases, which we've heard about biases, which I would say are not implicit. So cross that off. When you hear this kind of thing, it's not implicit. It's active, it's aggressive, and it's formational. In other words, the aim is to produce a discordance in you. I say I am female, I'm a woman. Acting against that, against my body and my psychology, has a purpose, and it's to have me not. Remember my question was, what was the impact on the self? The impact and the aim is to fragment that self from the identity that I understand myself as. These differences may be best understood within correctional environments in which staff biases, disciplinary cultures, and highly gendered programming may endorse or condone homophobic targeting while repressing consensual sexual expression. So what that means, I'm sure you know what it means, but I'll reiterate it. It means sexual violence or attack against someone. However, if that same person initiates or seeks out sexual contact with a peer, it's repressed, not allowed, and punished. Youth of color in juvenile justice facility. I'll ask you to look at this chart. By the way, this is not my chart, so I didn't create it. Look at these numbers here. LGBT youth overrepresented in the criminal justice system. 85% of LGBT youth and non-gender conforming youth in the criminal justice system. 85% are youth of color. Now, how do you pull that off? LGBT youth of color are overrepresented. They are pushed into the juvenile justice system. When they are pushed into the juvenile justice system, they lose contact with family, communities, and whatever their support systems are. They are frequently subjected to violence, harassment, misgendering, and emotional neglect. Mental health needs are undertreated. Their spiritual and religious needs, interests, and perspectives are neglected. Analysis of the federal system found that 39% of girls and 3.2% of boys in juvenile detention and correctional facilities self-identify as lesbian, gay, or bisexual, compared to 7 to 9% of youth who identify as LGBTQ nationally. A 2016 survey of juvenile detention and correctional facilities in California found that 19% of incarcerated youth identified as LGBT or non-gender conforming. 50% of girls identified as LGBT or gender non-conforming, and 90% of these youth were youth of color. High rates of incarceration for youth of color are not surprising, given that youth of color, in particular Black youth, are more likely to be in the juvenile justice system. Black youth are 4 times as likely as white youth to be incarcerated. Latino youth are 1.5 times as likely, and Native American youth were nearly 3 times as likely to be incarcerated. So what happens in schools that contributes to this pipeline. Policing within the schools. And by policing, I don't just mean that there are police running around the hallways, but I mean the ways in which students are policed in terms of their activities, their comments, their dress, their representation. In a study by the Gay Straight Alliance in San Francisco, participants overwhelmingly reported that LGBTQ youth of color are targeted by school and staff with increased surveillance and policing. For example, when students were asked whether or not LGBTQ youth of color are treated differently by administrators or teachers, one student explains how she not only feels watched, but that she and her friends are labeled gangsters. So think about that. It's not just that you're labeled gangsters, but again, this is an attack on the self. So they're not saying they're gangsters, they're being told they're gangsters. We get watched, a group like your friends, and you're all Mexican or black. They do watch you more, like, oh, there's a group of gangsters right there. These are from the participants. A lot of times the kids who look like they're more studious because of their race, parentheses, read white, and what they wear are, you know, paid less attention to because they're not thought of as a threat. So in other words, the message that these students hear is that they are a threat because of their identity, not because of what they've done, but because of the way they're perceived. To get back to Garlanda's presentation. Punishing gender expression. A black gay student was suspended for a week for wearing hair extensions in his hair. He goes to a pretty much all black school. Lots of girls have colorful hair extensions, but none of the other girls are getting suspended for having hair weaves. So in this case, in relationship to the self, the body is targeted. Your body does not look like what we say your body should look like. Go home. LGBTQ youth who are jailed, as I said, they lose contact with families. They're undertreated for mental health issues. Mental health is further compromised by the experiences of neglect, physical and sexual abuse in facilities committed by peers and staff. Mental health and spiritual religions settings have some help. In other words, people have gone for psychotherapy, they've gone to see pastors, and they're further traumatized or rejected and dehumanized. So part of what I'm trying to talk about is what do we do in clinical settings when both these areas, well, these three areas, the self, religious and spiritual concerns, and mental health have been so negatively affected. And one of the things we have to do is be aware of the fact that these have not always been helpful settings for people who identify as LGBTQ or people of color. If we neglect to take that into consideration, that's going to be operative in the room when we're trying to be helpful, but we're not getting it there. Spirituality and psychotherapy. These are not neutral terms, and they're not neutral processes and experiences. The messages about sexuality, embodiment, self, gender, sex itself, race, and ethnicity have often been distorted. An example I would use is I was a director of a shelter for homeless and runaway youth, ages 16 to 21. It was funded by a religious organization, a denomination. Most of the staff either were religious or identified as religious in order to get a job. LGBTQ youth's interactions with some staff contributed to youth's depression, aggression, and demoralized sense of self. Case in point, young 16-year-old man moves to the northern city where I was to get away from his southern town because he thinks these are his words, he thinks he might be gay. He's in the house a week. They can stay there up to a year. He's in the house a week. He goes to, upon my suggestion, a youth group for LGBTQ youth. Comes back. He's thrilled. He said, basically, I found my people. He's talking to me and he's talking to another counselor. The other counselor says, I don't care what those people told you, you're going straight to hell. He was so depressed that he tried to go up to the roof of the building and jump off. And she said to him, essentially, it might be better if you did. So as the director of the shelter, I thought that was grounds for firing. But I was informed that no, because her religious views matched the denominations, she couldn't be fired. Wow. My only solace was that she could be made to want to quit. That's another. Spirituality and psychotherapy. The psychotherapy setting, therapists have to acknowledge that the outside world, ideas, biases, hatred directed toward people, gets inside both the client and the therapist. So what I'm saying is that we're not free from the biases we're concerned about. And we have to be attentive to those in the room. A neutral stance toward homophobia, racism, ethnocentrism, and objectification, transphobia, misgendering by the psychotherapist is not only unacceptable, it's damaging. So in other words, it does nothing to mirror reality. The spiritual issues that are intertwined for LGBTQ youth of color are related to the core of the self and the developmental needs associated with becoming the person you envision. You know, we all have a vision of ourselves that we're working toward. If we're not paying attention to these other issues, we're not helping anyone. Religious and spiritual assumptions, hopes, and fears need to be engaged as an integral part of experience, not separated, not additional, kind of like the diversity class. No, it's a part of a whole person. Many LGBTQ youth of color have experienced trauma that they have not had the space or persons to trust to face. Trauma is insidious and makes its way into religious experience, spiritual practices, and theologies, or how we view the world. So for those of us, this is my little chart, dynamic process of psychotherapy and spirituality. And these little boxes, what I have in here, they could be changed to other questions. But at the center is we need to be aware of how our alliance for the work, how I'm, as a therapist, working in such a way that we're in agreement on the work that we're doing, and also what our resistances are. And I keep using the word our because the alliance is between the therapist and the person with whom we're working. But the resistances are not just, you know, you hear on TV shows, you hear psychotherapists on the TV show say, they have a resistance. Well, they're not the only one that has a resistance. When I supervise and train psychotherapists and they tell me that race, gender, sexuality never gets in the room, you know whose resistance is operative and in control? The therapist, page 1. Okay, so these are the kinds of questions that are, not that I'm necessarily asking, but that I'm aware of. What's the social context? What religious, spiritual, or cultural resources are operative for the person, even if they are no longer exercising them because of all the trauma? What's in there that's good and helpful and to help them move forward? What is actually needed? I put needed up there twice on purpose because I have supervised people where, and one example is someone was totally out of money, walked to in a snowstorm to get to their session, but they didn't have a token or to get on the train. And the training psychotherapist, wanting to be, you know, psychoanalytic, psychodynamic, didn't want to gratify the person, even though there were tokens available in the office for such needs. Didn't want to gratify because really didn't want to have to bring it to supervision to talk about grad time. Let the person back out from the snowstorm. Okay, how do you understand what happened in your life? How do you understand yourself? Basically, at the core of what I'm trying to present here is that integrating psychotherapy and spirituality is a process of helping people regain the sense of efficacy and self that allows them, in dialogue, to become the person they want to be and to be in relationship with others who are not dehumanizing them, who are not invalidating their perspectives and their worldview. Thank you.
Let's give one more round of applause for all of our. So before I give the conversation off to you all to ask questions, I thought that I might pose a few questions to the group that really have been resonating with me as I've been listening to each presentation. So the first one is this, building on your wonderful presentation, Dr. Sheppard, because this is a panel on faith and the school to prison, I'm curious what role you all think faith communities play in either perpetuating the cradle to grave pipeline and or in intervening. I wonder, Garland, if you might start.
Sure. A majority of freedom schools are located in churches and temples. I don't know of any in Indian mosques, but I think on a very local level, one of the things that I say about Nashville is we have more than 1,000 churches, and where there are 1,000 churches, I don't think we ought to have any homeless people. I don't think we ought to have any hungry people. We got 1,000 churches. I don't understand, but that I digress. I think that in a local level, churches can and faith communities can find out what's going on at schools, for example, nearby them. At the very, very least, a faith community could get involved in some sort of tutoring program or support program for parents. On a larger level, I think that religious organizations need to find out what's going on in their community, to understand what's going on in the community and how they can have a voice in that. Everyone in the faith community needs to be registered to vote. Need to encourage people who are in faith communities to give 5 hours a week to a cause that they care about. And that would be one of my things that I think that churches can and religious organizations can do that are positive, to give resources to, instead of just spending all the money on church parlor furniture, maybe giving some money toward books for kids or school supplies, those kinds of things. On a larger level, I think that the church oftentimes, at least I'm speaking from my own church experience, the church often mirrors the culture. And so we participate in racial bias, for example. I am United Methodist and I love my church, but our church is very stratified by race and class. The majority of people who worship in our churches worship in a monocultural, monoracial, monolingual, a single socioeconomic reality. And so I think that we have to be challenged at several levels to look at where we are actually participating in keeping racial segregation and what comes with that in life, when we are having conversations about how we quote unquote serve the community and be focused on charity rather than justice ministry. We'll open up a soup kitchen in a minute or collect money for the poor families with baskets at Christmas time. But what do we do all year round to look at justice issues? Do we recruit people to be CASA representatives for children who are in foster care? Do we train people to be advocates for kids in juvenile justice systems, or go with people in schools, go with parents that we are trained to work with parents when their children get in trouble in school? And it is very intimidating carrying forth its mandate to bring to bear what we know to be true in the world. And of course, we gotta check our homophobia. That's another thing I would say. You know, our churches many of our churches are just little hot, and when I say churches, I mean capital C, our denominations are still struggling with understanding that LGBT people, that people of color are valuable equal partners in this world. We're still dealing with that. And so I think we have to continue to work on those issues as well, that we have to be confronting in our own community. And that would be true of churches of all colors as well.
Burton said everything that I was going to say. Something I would add is that one thing I always tell people, like, it's about being demanding more of your pastor. Trying to get your bigger student. To me, as a pastor, is not proactive and actively engaged in the community. That's not a church for me. That's not a church for anybody else. So our sin, we've gone past the days when the pastor used to be the most educated person in the black community. And now when you're after a mega church and you got PhDs and talk about facility, it kind of starts to demand more. And when you're not necessarily stepping to feed that, to me, that's the sign. Like the Sunday and Wednesday, both the problem is this on Sunday and Wednesday, you got to be out and about actively engaging with students. I think that's right. And a lot of issues are being more proactive, being in the school, being in the neighborhood, being in the community, engaging and being that voice of those families who may not necessarily have the resources to do that.
Well, I guess I have two umbrella thoughts, reactions. The first I'll get to by saying that, like, the long way to a joke I've been saying a whole lot recently, earlier, which is that in places like Charlottesville and closer like Murfreesboro, there's been a revival of the chant that the Jews will not replace us, and I'm one of the replacements. You know, that is definitely part of my Jewishness and definitely part of the frame that I bring to the work that I do. And in two main ways. One is the emphasis on practice and what I do, regardless of what I believe. So what am I doing? And two is in every action in my work to repair the work of the world. Concept called that where there's an understanding that the world is broken and every action we working to repair it. But I also do think, you know, although on Saturdays there's often at least one person of color at Shabbat services, you know, the majority of my congregation, you know, the folks in Murfreesboro would say we're not like we're the lowest of the races, but we certainly passed. And you know, thinking about LGBT community in the Black church or people with less resources or more resources, just, you know, when one population is able to obtain some advantages, how do they use those advantages? So once you know, Jews became white, what are we doing? The other, that's actually just one thought. The other thought was just that, you know, when I was thinking about that, you know, writing that story about Ricky and everything, and, you know, is Ricky, when we say that that kid is engaged in bad behavior, there was a time when all education had this concept of moral education and moral discipline. And they would, you know, the kid would be looked at and said, that kid has a lack of moral character. Part of the role of school is to morally discipline, morally educate this person. And the reason that was there was because that was just a move from where education was Christian in the States, you know, it was Christian. And so that was, and I feel like there's, you know, some of what we're dealing with comes from that. It comes from, you know, if somebody's an addict, are they a sinful person? Are they a person of low moral character? Do they have an illness that needs to be treated? Or, you know, maybe there's something else too. but these things are definitely intertwined. That there was a time when, in the United States, there was always people that were addicted, when there were not the kind of drug laws that we have today to make lots of money for particular people. And the treatment was from from a frame that this was sin, and the treatment came from the treatment of sin. I hope some of that makes sense.
No, I think what I would say briefly is that I approach every question with the recognition of who I am. I'm a Black lesbian woman, large, and I go out into the world that way. So when you ask me, what do I think churches ought to do? I sort of turn it back on. What ought I do when I'm in church? And that is to make who I am known and make conversations apparent, make conversations so bold that they explicitly acknowledge the ways in which segments of humanity are told that they are not created in the image of God. And if you listen to the language that is used around LGBTQ persons, and prisoners, Jews, etc., you'll see a red thread, and all of it's aimed towards saying, you are not human. And that is what I try to do with my whole body and mind, counteract that. And so I prefer to be in churches where that conversation is already going on, and I have a group that's working with me, but I'm not going to sit in a church where I'm not making that explicit. So then there are a variety of things that churches, religious communities can do. One is talk across religious lines, organize across religious lines, and confront these very things that we're talking about. So that one question that would have to be asked, and then I'll stop, is how do we benefit? How do we, as churches, as individuals, benefit from this crazy system? Because we are. Because if we weren't, we'd all be up in arms.
So, picking up on this question of who benefits from the system and the ways that, because the system is constructed to work for somebody. Right? I'm curious with the current sort of political cultural moment that we're in, that Dr. Feldman raised, where again the conversation is starting to take on a different tenor, particularly as it relates to incarceration and drug laws, because the folks who are addicted look different. Or I would say they don't necessarily look different, but there's a new sort of heightened awareness around approaches that are perhaps based in healthcare, which we know work, right? Versus punitive purposes. I'm wondering, Dr. Noble, I am aware that systems mutate to function and perpetuate themselves. So even as this broader conversation is changing, I wonder if you might anticipate for us and look forward to us about how you might anticipate the system mutating to serve its same function.
Yeah, that's kind of what Ed Jones in the 13th watched the movie talked about how essentially we don't know what the next iteration will be, but it will be something. I think it is interesting when we hear all of the talk about opioid addiction now. And it reminds me, right now that I'm living this time, not quite old enough, but reminds me of my own research and looking at conflict theories and how we explain drug laws and how marijuana didn't become a more acceptable drug until the 60s, when the same politicians who were adamantly against any marijuana usage and sent everybody to prison for long periods of time. When your daughter was addicted, comes home from college and she's addicted to all the time marijuana laws change.
Right.
So I think that's some of what we're seeing with the opioid crisis right now. It's gotten a lot more attention, and I love how you point out the fact that it's framed in a different language than practical evidence, but it's the same kind of stuff we have going on. And to an extent, my skeptical mind always leads me to believe that somebody's profiting from some aspect of this. There's always the sociologist in me says that everything has a functional purpose in our society. in that this about face, because it is a pretty graphic about face. When you sometimes dig deeper and explore what brought this kind of things on, you discover that somebody had again in this who's benefiting from the change. Somebody had in that who's benefiting from the change. And you also have the question to what extent are we really truly sincere about doing taking all the steps necessary to completely solve the problem. We have the resources to solve a whole lot of the problems, but we don't throw all of the money and all the resources that are necessary to actually do it. Because again, to an extent it's functional. Somebody's benefiting from it. One of the slides that I didn't put in there, and this is a presentation, you step back and actually just even look at who all benefits financially from the prison industrial complex. There's so many political lobbyists and groups that have hands in that, where, I mean, to blow that up, you'd be blowing up half our political structure. So, yeah, I don't know exactly where the next iteration of comments address the opioid addiction, but it does make me question somebody's business. And I think it's time will tell in terms of what that would be.
I do think that the move toward a less criminal justice approach to the opioid addiction is directly related to race and class. The face that's put on it, NPR did a long segment a couple months ago about older adults who were opioid addicted and how it had impacted them. Most of the older adults were sounded educated. You know, I couldn't tell what they looked like on the radio, but they sounded well educated. They sounded very contrite. They had, the grandfathers and grandmothers. So and so was a retired school teacher, and I think so. The narrative, I think, is very racialized and very much a class issue. So I think when we're talking about it, I think what the narrative that we're being subjected to is a very different narrative than, say, the crack addiction or even in the marijuana use when I was old enough. So I think the narrative is different. These are the Norman Rockwell pillars of the community who got caught up in this very unscrupulous kind of thing, as opposed to, the crack era was our sister Hillary, who was talking about super predators and the crack, So just the very nature of how people are named, I think, puts a very racialized spin on it. And I think that's what we're doing. And so I think you will see fewer people in the opioid addiction craze being incarcerated, particularly people of a certain socioeconomic ilk. And you'll see more push on treatment. I was looking at a property recently with a friend of mine, and they were thinking about putting, I forget the name of the drug, the counter drug. They're thinking about putting this huge clinic in a place where one of our malls is. And they're getting big money to open up this clinic to provide this, I don't know why I can't think of the name.
Suboxone. I was just thinking, the same thought, that the makers of Suboxone and Burton,
Yes.
methadone has been around for a long time. And why has methadone been around for a long time? People have been dying from opioid addiction for longer than the last 5 years. And it's just that different people are dying at different rates. And so now all of a sudden we have an opioid epidemic. And people are still dying and are living lives of suffering from crack and cocaine addiction. And it seems so bald-faced, no pun intended, that the way the lyrics have changed. It seems so clear, and that we're talking about opioid addiction. We're not talking about people that are suffering from crack and cocaine addiction, and the impacts those have that addiction has had on whole communities, and how that happened is a whole other. How those drugs are introduced in those communities is a whole other story as well. I mean, to me, it is a positive thing if this shift happens. It says something about our culture. This is how these shifts have to happen. And someone's still going to make money, that's for sure. It's just going to be the makers of Suboxone and the other drugs. Because when you hear in these, sometimes it's not even subtextual. You hear on radio reports about how we need to shift to a treatment-based approach. What they're talking about is medication-assisted treatment, which is methadone, Suboxone, and you know, somebody that's worked in the addiction field for as long as I have done my best to work out of my prejudice, which my initial reaction around those kind of medications is very negative. You're replacing, now you just have somebody paying a different dealer. And I don't think that's totally, you know, the pharmaceutical company is the dealer. I don't think that's actually totally fair. I think that, especially when we think to ourselves, how can we just reduce harm, that these medications are probably useful as part of a larger approach, but definitely we need a larger approach.
What questions are you all carrying? Been absorbing a whole lot of information in the past hour and a half.
I have a question. I think this will connect. I'm struck in this conversation about opioids. I'm struck by thinking about the ways that white bodies, when they're addicted, are viewed as innocent, and black bodies, when they're addicted, remain viewed as criminal and unhuman. And I've been thinking about white innocence a lot lately, especially in the class I'm keeping with Dr. Floyd Thomas. And I'm wondering if this question is, I think, for the psychotherapists of the group, but I would be interested if others have thoughts on it. And perhaps I began thinking about this at your presentation this week at Dr. Sheppard at the Race, Ethics, and Religion Conference here at the school. But I'm wondering about how might psychotherapy, well, looking back at one second, I also noticed in the presentations our gaze was really directed on thinking about the ways Black bodies in particular are internalizing and how that's dealing or impacting self-image. And I'm wondering how might psychotherapy help us to think about the illness of whiteness? And what would that look like, especially as we think about structure, like keeping the individual in a structure as we do psychotherapy? You know, when we think about notions of white innocence and notions of white injury and how that reflects, you know, ways that whiteness has shaped the ways whites think about themselves and are thought about in the world. I wonder what you might say about how a psychotherapist could approach dealing with the illness of whiteness.
Well, you'll remember from the presentation, was it just a few days ago? One of the things I said when Dr. Gay presented his case, I said, I've had Mr. R in my office. And a decidedly different approach that I think I take is that I think racism and everything else that I would add to it should be analyzed. And if it's not, if you're doing analysis, if it's not, then it's a failure of the treatment. So I see the illness that you're naming as one of the reasons that people come for treatment. But I also recognize that they're often, that's the piece that is not treated, if you will. So that's what I would say. And I would say that if you remember earlier, I said, if race, gender, racism, if that's not coming up in the treatment, to me that means that the therapist needs to get supervision or needs to be reanalyzed.
It's, well, you know, it's hard, first of all. A lot of therapists have been trained to remain objective, neutral, non-directive, and to, in one way or another, the best you can do. This is not all therapists, not all communities of therapists, schools of therapy, but a lot of them, the idea is, I'm not going to take I'm not going to take you somewhere. I'm going to create an environment where you can come and, you know, fully actualize yourself on your own. Does that make sense? So people who have you watch the image of the therapist on TV and they're just kind of nodding and saying, well, what do you think? And, you know, that's because a lot of therapists are trained, and that's the most helpful you can be. So actually confronting someone and you know, what I think I'm hearing you saying is, you know, is there a role for therapists to help white people conscientize their privilege and the way in which they have power and might abuse that power without knowing it? You know, I follow that word from Fanon, and you know, there are people that talk about this as a role for therapy to have, to help people come to social consciousness and come to awareness, not just of things that are in their unconscious, like, you know, that they really want to have, you know, sex with their mom, but that they might have privilege, you know, and so that's a joke. That was a joke about it. That was very awesome. Anyway, you know, it's most therapists are not trained in that style, but there have been growing schools that, you know, view that as part of the work. That part of the work is to bring this in, to heal some of these larger wounds.
But it's not just that they're not trained, because like this idea that you don't want to lead the person, like for instance, I don't want to lead somebody to talk about racism if it's not in the room. But the fact is, we are always leading. Patient says, I hate my mother. Therapist says, well, tell me about hating your mother. Some therapists might say, that's leading. Why? Because of the place of questioning for one thing, or response. That's a lead. Let me say one more thing, but the other thing is that there are things that therapists explicitly notice. So when I was training to be a psychoanalyst, I had a colleague who presented a case, and the case she presented was of a Jewish woman. She was Jewish, and she made all kinds of assumptions, accepting all kinds of things because they were both Jewish. Now I'm sitting in the room. I have no idea about these assumptions. So I'm asking all these questions. Everyone else was Jewish too. And they kind of thought I was crazy. Like, what is wrong with you? They're Jewish. Okay, they're Jewish. I presented a case. It's a Christian woman who was Missouri Senate, Lutheran. Here's the story. The father had gone to seminary, left seminary in the middle, went up to Minnesota, did whatever. And so, no, someone else presented this case. So I said, well, why did you leave seminary? The professor, who's Jewish, says, what difference does it make? I said, why did it matter when this other patient was Jewish and it doesn't? I said, do you know anything about Missouri Senate? And he goes, no. I said, he didn't leave seminary. He was thrown out. And that narrative is a part of that family's life and this individual's life. So my point is, where we come from shapes what we hear and what we think is important to pursue. Where I come from, we're going to pursue anything that might lead us down the road to curing the ills of whiteness.
Yeah, it's a value. It's a value-based position to say objectivity, not directing someone is a good thing to do, the right thing to do. But there's no exit from saying this is what we want to take someone to. So you're still adopting a frame of this is the right way someone should be. It's just but what is it? And not pretending that I'm not actually taking a stand somewhere,
And it can go wrong.
Right.
And I personally think too that teachers need, instead of just one class on diverse population, I think that teachers need some immersion in not only cultural competence, but in unpacking whiteness. I think it's very important because there is an overlay on our culture that does not serve our children well. It doesn't serve white children well either, because if you start to internalize this privilege, and these teachers in this Yale study were probably not bad people, but they have been nurtured from birth to believe in their own superiority, to believe in negative things about people of color that they probably weren't even aware of. And so I think, I probably won't get far with this, but I think that's a value. I know when I was working in head of an agency, one of the values in hiring people was how much experience have you had in cultures outside of your own. And I did not hire people who did not have an intercultural context. even though that wasn't a part of the job description, we were working in a very integrated, we were working internationally, we were working, nationally, regionally, and, I've worked with people or interviewed people who didn't have a clue. And I thought, this is just gonna make my work harder. So I think we have to look at criteria. One of the things that bothers me is I just learned this because I'm not from an education background, that most of the teachers who teach English as a second language don't speak a second language. They don't have to speak another language. They teach English as a second language without knowing any other language. What? How can you even know what a child goes through, what a person goes through when they're trying to navigate a second language if you've never done that? And you come with this sense of superiority that because people don't speak English well, they're dumb. I mean, we do that in our systems. We do that. And you may have a child I've worked with kids from Zimbabwe who speak 7 languages. And do we really think we're smarter than that child about language? I mean, that's the construct from which we're coming. So I think we have to work from that. And one of the languages is the language of the street. There's an author that I just read his book a year ago. It's called For White Folks Who Teach in the Hood and For the Rest of Us Too. And he is his name is Chris Imden, and he is an education professor. And his argument is that teachers in our U.S. system are not conversant about the children that they're teaching. They don't know the language of the hood. They don't know the language of rural areas. They don't know the language of LGBTQ. And because of that, the children who come from those constructs are at a disadvantage because the teachers don't. And so my argument would be that yes, people need to be taught and nurtured in a culture of a broader gaze, because we are very insular, most of us, in our upbringing and our thinking.
Time for one more question.
Hi there. Thank you all for your contributions and what you've said today. It's been very interesting to think about ways in which we can maybe correct some of the system. One of the things that I was curious about and that came to mind as you all were talking was Ron Brown High School in Washington, D.C. that recently opened, an all-black boy high school in D.C. that the goal of it is essentially to get these kids to graduation. And so I was wondering about what you think the role of the school is. That's kind of maybe come up in some of your discussion today. What is the role of school in terms of what is supposed to be provided there socially, culturally, in addition to academics, and what types of things do we need to see in schools in order to disrupt the system outside of some of the things we talked about with regards to teachers and teaching?
I think one of the things that I think about my own school experience in coming in part of the zero tolerance era, some of the teachers that I had who looked like me, and I had teachers who did look like me. But I did remember Dr. Sheppard reminded me of the story came to my mind. And I think about all the times that the Dachshund was my English teacher, when the Dachshund observed me misbehaving in class, and she gave me the option to come up and stand next to her and pinch the back of my biceps and bring me in this another teacher's class, I may have read up in this behavior. But she took a different approach to make sure that I didn't get caught up in the system of the referral system, of the suspension, of these different things. So I think sometimes having teachers who look like you kind of have see the bigger picture and explore all of the options in terms of how we go about fixing what's taking place versus simply writing you up at the first time. So teachers are important, but I also have the mindset that I think sometimes we put too much of an onus on what we expect the school to do, and not to go into everybody's family situation. But I take it personally with my 5-year-old and my 1-year-old to make sure that the school is simply a complement, not a supplement to what I'm getting at home, what I'm getting at home. And so when we do the books we read at home are way more difficult than the books you read at school. We do science projects at home, they're way more advanced than stuff at school. And so I don't want to get us in the mind of thinking the school has to be this fix all of everything, because they're gonna spend a whole lot more time at home in a home environment. And that's, I think, we can focus and a great deal of resources as well, which is me, part of that goes back to the church and everything that we talk about. But what are we doing about that environment? The school can be a good complement, but I don't think we need a supplement for the socializations and knowing values and other things. In the context of the school, I think that it does help and it's important to have people who have vested interests. I've done it even at the end. There's been times that I've observed students and I get to now from a professor standpoint. When I know that, a white colleague would not have done it. Because again, Ms. Dotson, Mr. Holman did that for me. And I tried because I wasn't necessarily held with that same steadfast hard standard that basically was going to push me out and push me into a path that I wouldn't be blind at something different.
I do know of a principal here in town who has a little refrigerator in her office, and she knows the children that are hungry. And when the children are misbehaving and she knows the children are hungry, she makes a bologna sandwich in her own office for kids who come to school hungry. Now, they have free and reduced lunch, but sometimes, the kids are hungry. She does that. I agree. I think the schools can't be fix-alls. I do think that help supporting parents. You're a great parent. It sounds like you have resources. Some of our parents don't have the wherewithal to do those things. In Freedom School, we give away books because some of our kids have no books in the home at all. They may have a Nintendo, but they don't have any books. Or they may not have a Nintendo book. I think that colleges, schools, religious organizations, as I said before, can provide supplemental things. I think the school gives a basic curriculum, and what gives an edge to people who have more money and more access is their parents can afford to send them to a camp that costs $200 a week. And I have done that, sent my grandkids to summer camp that costs $200 a week. That's a lot. I mean, I have to save for it. And that's a lot of money. It's cost prohibitive. I think to have find programs in the community where kids are getting that supplemental thing, and after school tutorial program, one-to-one mentoring with kids who may not have, if your mom's working 3 jobs and she's a single parent, she may not have time to take care of you and advocate for you. The whole advocacy piece is very important. I think that we can work better with schools with regard to the zero tolerance policy. And a lot of schools, even in Metro, they started doing restorative justice practices in schools here. And those things are bearing fruit. It's just slow, and there's never enough money to get it across the board. So I think advocating, going to school board meetings if you don't have kids, finding out what's going on and advocating a couple of things, and making sure that you're involved where you can be in schools. But working with kids one-on-one is very important. A lot of times the difference between a child who makes it and doesn't is not only socioeconomic, because they have a caring adult in their life, and it may be a teacher who decides what he described as called a fat meat squeeze, at least in my I'm a grandmother and I do that too. I grab the fat meat and fish it so you get quiet. It may be the fat meat squeeze, or it may be taking an extra chance with the child or extra time with the child. I have a special needs grandchild. She has a learning disability, and she has an algebra teacher who's been working with her every day after school, and it's made a difference in her math skills. And this teacher doesn't have to do that. And so I think the schools can do those kinds of things. But I would also agree that we have to bring the schools to bear, because teachers are the most underpaid, undersung heroes. I've sat in classes with teachers, and they are beat down. A lot of teachers are beaten down. So I think we have to look at that as well.
Yeah, I mean, it was something I was thinking of, and I was writing that vignette. If you're that teacher and you know that your student is regularly not going to get to eat, and so what do? You have your mini fridge there. Of course, that's just feeding. That's just that kid is staying to eat. That kid also has a home, and their parents are dealing with stuff, and And so, what is the role for the therapist who is, these presenting symptoms are being, there's, I can't stop thinking about this thing. Can you help me to get out of this obsessive thinking? But they're also part of the larger system too. So what's my role? My job is to help reduce these symptoms, right? The other profession I associate to is when here recently, the white communities, the larger white communities discovering that addiction kills you here in recent months, and cell phones recently told them that Black people were being killed by the police for the first time, and there'll be all these stories about the role of the police officer, and the same phrase would come up a lot of times, which is that the police were sometimes, if they're doing the right things, were functioning as social workers. If they're doing community policing, they would be acting like social workers. Not a particular kind of therapist, by the way. It's kind of interesting, particular kind of therapist that's supposed to be thinking about these larger systems or whatever. But that's, to me, whenever I hear that, I think that was really interesting, right? This person's job is to enforce the law and to be punitive. That's their only job. Their only, well, I guess, is to prevent crime and protect people from crime. But they were, if you're encountering suffering, and they knew that the right way to respond to the suffering might not be punitive, might be something else. So then they were becoming social workers. So it's just, it's when it's. I think what it comes down to is that we live in systems, and there is no just one job if you're in a system. You're also a parent. You're also a member of your religious community. So,
Thank you all so much. This has been a great conversation. Thank you to our panel.